Welcome to Typecasting, pop culture by the numbers.
Ronald Weasley! How dare you steal that car! I am absolutely disgusted! Your father's facing an inquiry at work! That was off the top of my... Thank you. It was all off the top of my memory, so I lost it. Oh, and Ginny, dear, congratulations on Gryffindor. Your father and I are so proud.
My favorite TikToks of people like pretending to be younger versions of Harry Potter things are the ones who are Arthur and Molly, like falling in love in Hogwarts.
Just sent me one, and it might have been you, of Arthur and Molly, like, and Dumbledore is like knocking on the door, and he's like, I know you two are in there, and they're like, okay, who's gonna talk to him?
I love those. That is Lucas Graydon, your host. And honestly, I think the Weasleys are missing you as a member. Like, I think you would be a good Weasley. You would really bring that feminine, powerful, masculine energy, because I feel like none of them really do that. And I think that you would be really nice to Percy, and he would have felt included if you were an additional member of the Weasley household.
I could have saved that family so much strife. Well, you know, I did dye my hair red once.
Shut up. I did not know that. When?
It was a temporary, it was like a spray dye. I agreed for like an old high school teacher.
Do you remember this though?
She had a connection to the local CW, which I was just telling the story today because I now work at the same station as my local CW. But this was when I was home for college for the summer. And she was like, hey, my friend works for the CW and they are having this float. There's this big parade going on downtown in this big nearby city. And they are doing a Riverdale float. And so I was like, yeah, granted, had I ever seen a episode of Riverdale? No, I had not. I still have not to this day. And I show up at this office to get my costume. She has bought this like spray red hair dye and a athletic, like a Riverdale High School athletics shirt with a hood on it, but it's not a hoodie. It's a crop top. And if anybody knows me in real life,
you don't not look like KJ Appa. I don't know how to say it.
Oh, actually,
you know what I mean? Like you guys have similar faces. Like,
I do need to shave right now. And looking at myself, like, I don't know if you've seen KJ Appa on TikTok. Like, I feel similar to like manic, like crazed KJ Appa right now. I
don't keep up with him.
Long story short, I should never have been in a crop top, and I wore that crop top for like 2 hours downtown through a parade with my spray painted red hair.
Oh my gosh.
Hopefully I was just not recognizable enough for anybody to know it was me. So that was me as the 8th Weasley child, actually.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
That's your host, Mirjana Tumatua, the only person who could make a home as welcoming as Molly Weasley and the Burrow.
Oh, wait, that is such a nice thing to say, and I also think it's very accurate, so I appreciate that.
You keep asking me to talk about that at your funeral, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit, and
I have asked Lucas to make sure people know that I'm very good at housewarming at my funeral. And if I outlive Lucas now, you all know too.
Exactly. I had to get it out there first, just in case.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Oh, are you ready for this episode?
I'm so excited. I keep saying, we talked last week how we're doing Harry Potter. And, are we doing the movies or the books? And I was like, we'll just focus on the movies. And then I think about these characters. And for some reason, the only examples I keep thinking of only happen in the books. So I do apologize. I will be sure to rein it in.
I'll just have to take your word for it, though. That's the only thing. I haven't read the books in a very long time, and I only read them once. So
good. I have full control.
This is very similar to this. There's just one board game that my friends used to play. I don't even remember what it's called, but you have to come up with a song that's like has one word featured, And because I grew up in the church, I just kept like making up church songs and like no one else scribed.
Nobody knew because you were just making up fake worship songs.
And they're so easy to write on as everyone knows. Worship songs are pretty easy to write on the cup. So I just kept like making up these silly songs, and that's what I did. Anyway, that's so very similar to what might happen on this episode. And I just want to preface, so yeah, we're doing the Weasleys, and we're specifically doing the twins. I'm obsessed with the twins. When I got on TikTok, I was on Harry Potter Talk for a long while, and everyone was like, remember? I think before and even more than you were, which is
for sure.
Yeah, and I was on like Draco Talk, and I do not agree with Draco Talk. Do not believe Snape Martyrs Talk, because like a lot of that is like fan fiction stuff that like I never was even a little bit familiar with. However, I was like so into Fred and George, and I was like, I think this is like my new celebrity crush, even though they're like old now. They're married and have children. I was like, oh wait, I think these would have been my people. I stand them, and I would have been, if I was at Hogwarts, I would have had a crush on one of them. So
do you remember, now that you say that, I remember you sending me a TikTok like literally a year ago when those Hogwarts aesthetics were going around, where it's like, this is your Hogwarts life. Yes. And you were like, this made me weirdly emotional. Like, I'm very attached to this. And you were like dating George Weasley. That's like the one thing I remember.
And like, it's like, what's your dress at the ball and who you're going with. And I was like, I was just like, I wish this actually happened to me. It was so funny. I'm not a big fantasy girl. So it was really funny that like made me so nostalgic.
Seriously. I love it. I remember that now that you say that with your Fred and George talk.
Yes, because I like, again, spoiler-filled podcast. I was like, I am a George stan, not because I really cared. However, I did not want my husband to die or my boyfriend to die. So I was like, I'll just be a George girl.
We are going to have to like get into that more specifically when we dive into Fred.
About this.
That I am going to get emotional just thinking about it right now. Beautiful scene, so tragic.
Yes, let's just dive in. I mean, we're going to talk about Fred.
Yes,
I would love to hear your thoughts. I can talk a little bit about what I know, but Fred and George, you sent me a beautiful article today that was like, I usually think of Fred and George as like one person, and it was just like very well written and like quite beautiful. And we'll link it in the show notes so you guys can see kind of where we're getting some of our bases for, because we did not do that on our own. But so I'm gonna do my best to talk about them right now separately, but I might talk about them as a conglomerate now, and then when you talk about George, how about you like break down what you think the difference is? Is that cool?
Okay.
So like Fred and George Weasley are the older brothers, the directly older brothers of Ron, and Ron is in the Golden Trio. He's one of our main characters in the Harry Potter universe, and so we're with him throughout. And Fred and George are his supportive older brothers, and they like love to hate him, hate to love him. They have such a sibling rivalry going on with really like all of the siblings, and also are incredibly accepting to Harry. And I think that in many ways we see the Weasley adopt Harry and kind of become his chosen family. But one of the most beautiful things is their relationship, and like you get to see the ways that they value Ron through Harry too. Like I think you don't notice some things that they do for him until then. The other things that are like they're jokesters, they're silly, they're pranksters. They get through school like barely skating by. They have the Marauders map, and like they won't really explain how they got it. I don't know if like in detail.
They do mention, I don't know if they say this in the movie, but they do mention that they nicked it from Filch's office their first year, because Filch was like yelling at them about something, and Filch had confiscated it from the Marauders, and they like saw it and thought it was interesting, and they stole it.
Oh my gosh. In my mind, it went down to the class clown from Generation to Generation.
Oh, I love that. Like a little like Senior Wills. Like that's a very Greek life reference, but
that's what I thought of it was. No. We had one of those in my like high school theater. We had like a necklace that went down, and it was like from one at like the 80s, and someone has gone it every year, which is super cool. I didn't get it, and that's fine, Sam Keen, but Anyway, long story short, that's what I thought happened, but I like that better. There are differences, and again, like I took some notes between who's who. One of the things that we do find in the end is that, you know, Fred does die. The way Lucas explained it was like Fred's dead, and that's like the best way to remember. But George has to like
have a hard time remembering. Yeah. So
no, I mean
Fred
it's tricky because they're put it
Yeah.
together. But the other thing is like George loses his ear, and we'll talk about that. Like again, I feel like I memorized all the differences between George and Fred from a George perspective. So we'll dive in. So Lucas, I want to hear what you think and like what you think the Enneagram type is of Fred, because that's who we're kicking off with.
Yes. And that article that you mentioned, it's called Not Just Fred and George, all one word, The Twins' Differences. And it's written by Josie Kearns from October of 2009. And I found this thing years ago somewhere on the internet, and it has stuck with me since. And so Marjana too, like you said, I sent it to you earlier, and it is beautiful. Highly recommend for any Harry Potter fan, any fan of the twins, to really highlight some of those differences. With Fred specifically. And I think it's really interesting to look at their characters, and in the way that even just as they are being written, they are always introduced as Fred and George. And I think that there are really key things about Fred's character that bring him first. He is kind of in this two-man duo, the leader. He's always kind of the one who initiates the action. He is the ideas man, and he's the one who is sometimes, I think, ready to step a little bit over the line, whether he's feeding fireworks to salamanders they talk about, or like they give, I think he says like Fred gave Ron an acid pop when he was a little kid and like burned a hole through his tongue. Like Fred is that jokester. He is always like, he's very high energy. And alongside, they do kind of have this like third musketeer in Lee Jordan, while they are at Hogwarts, one of their friends, the Quidditch commentator. They're also the beaters on the Quidditch team. And I think that like that high energy, like kind of aggressive, like hitting the bludgers very much like matches their personalities. The way that Josie put it in her essay, which I absolutely love, is that Fred, she called the driver. This is actually specifically referencing when they break Harry out of his bedroom in Chamber of Secrets, and they steal exactly the howler that I was referencing earlier. When they steal the car, Fred is the one driving the car in the book. I think it might be Ron in the movies. I can't remember. And he's always kind of the one taking lead, taking charge. He's a jokester. He's high energy. They, like you call them jokesters, they literally start a joke shop after setting off a bunch of crazy fireworks inside of the castle and then just like quitting their senior year. And I think all of that being said, Fred is the type 7. Okay. He is a enthusiast to the highest extent. There is a piece to the 7 that I read about in The Road Back to You like years ago now. And I've never seen it more clearly than I see it in Fred, where they talk about the 7 being in the thinking triad. And even though 7s may not present as deep and thoughtful and always like ruminating, they are always thinking about what's next. The gears are always turning about like, what's the next scheme? What's the next plan? How can we make more fun? But he's very intelligent. He's like, how can we turn a profit? I see a beautiful type 7 in Fred. And I don't want to say too much again until we get to George and some of those differences, but I will leave it at that for now. Okay. What do you think?
I love it. However, okay, so I thought they were like obvious 7s. I don't even have to do my homework this week. This is great.
Right.
And then I just watched a lot of videos and kind of remembered their story and like who they were. And again, all movie based. And I was like, wait a second, especially with Fred, as you're saying, like Fred is the leader. He's the driver. He's the instigator. I was like, they're very competitive with not even like just each other. It's interesting because they're very active, and I think they're competitive in like Quidditch, and like they want to beat Slytherin more than anything. I think they like instigate a lot of the fact that like Harry hates it and hates like Slytherin, like because and then he learned his own reasons, but like this is why we have to get there, and they are always performing. And so I was like, they might be okay. Fred, because Fred is the driver, might be a 3. And I was thinking of the many literal performances they've put on because they're like the class clowns and they're like, oh yes, like and they have this wizarding shop, this like jokester shop. What is it called? Is it called Joke
Weasley's
Shop?
Wizard Wheezes.
Wizardly Wheezes. That is very, very successful upon like first arriving. I feel like they really freshen up Diagon Alley.
Especially
like,
in that time of war where they comment like,
yes!
This is the only shop that's still open. And it's because like people need a laugh right now.
Exactly. And I think they're just like such entrepreneurs. So like I said, I think Fred might be a 3. I hear the 7. Like, I think he's an obvious 7. But I was like, I wanted to challenge that and just be like, what if he's a 3? Mm-hmm. And I did think because Fred is the leader and it's like Fred starts it, George backs it up. I did think that Fred would be the 3 of the 2, of like the twins. Right. But I'm curious, like, what you think about that, because like I do see the 7, and like one of my points about Fred was just like one of the things that's interesting in both the book and the movie is like, it's about George. Oh. Go ahead. What do you think about it?
Yeah. I think the 3 did come up for me. And it is very much, okay. I think, in that way that he is a planner. I was going to say this to your point when you were introducing them, that they just kind of like skate through school and don't care. They do not care about class, but they are both very talented wizards. They like invent these new magical spells and products, and they have these really powerful enchantments on a lot of the things that they're selling at their store that I think is like probably indicative of a type 3. They have that. And like you said, Fred especially has that entrepreneurial spirit where he is like, we're going to go out and start a business. Like, we're going to leave. I think that he has the practicality and the pragmatism of a 3, where they're like, we are going to stay at Hogwarts as long as it serves us and as long as we are learning. But as soon as Umbridge like takes a step too far, like, we can leave. Like, this is not serving me anymore. Like, I'm just going to like go be practical. Like, what is the next best thing? Again, I see a lot of that in the 7 too, and like in their like forward thinking and like what's coming next and like where's the next big thing, the next fun thing. I could see both, which is where I'm torn. I see his wing stronger on the 7 than I do on the 3. So I'm interested in what you think about the 3 wing.
Yeah. So I did think that I did think that Fred was a softie. Like, and I was like, he obviously cares very much for the people around him. And so I thought that Fred has a wing too. And so I can, it's hard because I also am like, I hate to say this, but I'm like, I think either of them, I could make arguments for either of them being 3s. I do think the wing, though, is where I get stumped on Fred, where I think I can hear what you might be about to say.
I'm interested because it's funny because obviously we're trying to type them separately. However, yes. I think we both have a pair of like numbers for the twins that we want. And I think I'm now hearing what yours is. And I think like you're figuring out what mine is. So this is fascinating.
You know what? Do you want to, maybe let's not settle.
Yes, let's not settle.
Let's go to George.
Before, yes. And I just want to say my wing for Fred real quick. And then, yes, let's go to George.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that Fred is a wing 6.
Yeah.
And I mean, similarly, I think to what you're saying about the 2 and the way that it like softens the 3, I think the 6 brings out those like that deep loyalty, his care for his family, his care for his brother. Like, I see a 7 wing 6, but before we get into it more.
Oh, but Lucas, here's the thing. Here's what I thought.
Oh, okay.
I thought let's like kind of I'm talking about George a little bit here. When I was like thinking about the 7, I thought Fred would have a wing 8. I think he is the instigator. He's the challenger. And like, it's can be like softies for sure. Totally, and like he can show his love in those things. And because George is the follower, and like one of the articles, I can't remember, I think it was the one that was on the Wizarding World, said that, Fred acts, George explains. And I was like, okay, I think Fred is the 8. He's pulling through. I think it was totally his idea to leave Hogwarts. And I do think that entrepreneurial spirit we can see in that 8. And George would be the 6 because he's the low one. Coming behind, like a little anxious. He's probably thinking through things and he's the one explaining it. So I want to hear what you say.
I see that.
Ooh, tell me about
think
George.
That's a
Tell me
great
who George
point.
is.
I think that's a great point. I think you misunderstand. I think you want them. No, I think you want them to be the same number, and I don't think they're going to be the same number. Like, I don't think they're both 7s. So
okay.
That's where maybe this is. So yeah, we'll see.
I think what's hard is like I think that's, I can see how you may think that, but I don't really feel that way because it was just like that's where my thought process went.
I see that.
Okay. Tell me about George, and we can get into it full fledged.
Love George. I think George is the one who benefits from these articles more than anyone because Fred is such like the first person. Like, you think about the twins, it is Fred and George. Like you said, George explains after Fred acts. George kind of spends his time reining Fred in, keeping him from like crossing the line. I loved a quote in the article by Josie that said, so when Hermione asks if they've ever truly cared about getting into trouble, George says, of course we have. We've never been expelled, have we? Like, George is the one who like knows when to stop. Like, he knows how to, I think, maybe get him out of trouble. He's also, I think, very thoughtful. He is the one, I love this. When Harry is first entering platform 9 3/4, the twins are like one of the first people that he meets. And George goes up and asks him if he needs help with his luggage. Like, I think he has that like helpful heart. He like wants to help take care of people. He sees when they're looking at how expensive the books are going to be for Lockhart in their second year. Well, technically Fred and George's 4th year. Fred is just like, oh, the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor must be a fan of Lockhart. And George looks at the list and says, this won't come cheap. Lockhart's books are really expensive. That is where I see him like being, like you said, a little bit more anxious, like a little bit more like trying to take care of and like mitigate some of the circumstances. So I think that they call him the navigator in this article. If Fred is in the driver's seat, George is the one in the passenger seat, like making sure they get where they need to go and like reining him in, maybe telling him to watch the speed limit a little bit. Like, I love that dynamic that they have. And I think that he is an easy character to overlook in his uniqueness without like this deep dive that these articles really give.
I'm getting like emotional. Like the more we talk, I'm like, how is he doing? Like, who's driving? Like, is he okay? Oh. I know it's not real. I do.
No, not. Oh my gosh. This is like some Tumblr trend from however long ago that talked about how like for George, every mirror is the mirror of Erised because he just sees his brother.
Ooh, okay. It is very, very, oh wow.
And he spends his life like trying to keep Fred safe.
I know. It's very beautiful. Very beautiful. I just really love that's why I think they're 2 of the best characters in the whole series. So I'm very happy to be here.
And I have to give a shout out. I know like we haven't settled on Fred yet either, but I do just have to give a shout out to that scene because we're not typing Percy. But Percy's arc in the books is one of my favorite things that got lost in the movies. When he comes back and he joins the fight and they are fighting with the Minister for Magic, like Percy's old boss who like ripped him away from his family. And he says, by the way, Minister, like consider this my formal resignation. And Fred says like, Percy, are you joking? Like, I can't believe you just like cracked a joke. And he is laughing at Percy's joke when he dies. And like,
well, and the other thing, when George's ear gets like taken off, I don't know if the right thing is like, he also makes a joke, but also it's like bringing other people comfort. Like, it's not a joke because like, oh, this is silly. Like, I think it's like of reassurance
to like let Fred know that he's okay. Like to let Fred know that he doesn't have to worry.
That's where I saw the 2 in him.
Okay.
And so I thought he was a 2 with a wing 3 because he still had the entrepreneurial spirit. He's like, he's going for it. He loves the attention, but I do think he does a lot of this out of love for his brother. And I wonder like if Fred weren't his twin and it was Ron, if he also would have been more of like the supportive, I don't know, like he seems just like a really good person / friend to be on your side. So I thought he was a 2 with a wing 3 because he does still like, you have to like be gaining something from all of those like little pranks and like just being over the top all of the time. So I thought of him as a 2-wing 3. And like you said, I think maybe I did think of them as pairing, but it was just like helpful for me to navigate it. But I could see, like, especially the way that you just explained him, like, I think you might have explained a 6 more so. And I can or 9. Okay, Lucas, what do you think?
Okay.
What do you think?
I think he's a 6. No, I think he's a 6.
Okay.
And so where your pair is maybe like the 3-wing 2 and the 2-wing 3, like I see a 7-wing 6 and a 6-wing 7. Like I see, because they are so similar. Like I don't want to discount the fact, like they are very similar. I think they do have some core differences, but I like the idea in either one of our typings, like the way that they just kind of like are reaching across that wing to like be next to each other the whole time. However, I do see that 6. I see that person. Like, I don't think Fred, like, as a loose cannon, could have made it as far as he did, like, without that 6, like, keeping him safe. But he is also so deeply loyal. He is in some ways a follower. And to the 2, and I could totally see the 3 and the 2 pairing. But I see, like, he does go along with it. Like, they can kind of be like, they can tease, they can kind of bully, like, they do pull pranks. And I think that, like, for George, it's more about his specific relationship with his brother, his specific loyalty to his family, maybe, than it is to, like, the kind-heartedness of everyone.
I hear
of
what you're
2.
saying. I think a lot of times in this podcast, we don't, like, talk about the strengths and the beauties of 3s. And I think they both, I think especially Fred is such a good example of like what 3s are. Like, I think a lot of times we get into like, okay, the villains, because I think if Fred and George were to read Harry Potter and realize they weren't the main characters, they would be shocked. What do you think? I
don't know. I think George especially doesn't know that he's the main character.
Okay, I think Fred would be like, this would be so much funnier from my point of view. Like, I don't know.
Funnier,
I think it'd be funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is like,
yeah,
maybe to the 7. Like I think they do try to bring joy to the people around them.
Yes,
but you're right. Like I do see some of that on. I almost
it's what they value.
Hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
I think I see Fred as the 3 more than the 7, maybe. But I think I see George more as a 6 than I do a 2.
And then they're connected 3, 6, 9.
Yes, they're connected to like the anchor points.
Yes, I can do that. I can meet you there.
Are we thinking like 3-wing 2, 6-wing 7?
Oh, that's the thing. I didn't know about his wing very much. Yeah, I think wing 2. I think wing 2, because it's like the family connection. And yeah, I had a hard time with that wing.
I'm surprised I like it. I'm surprised we got there.
Me too. I just like, they're so obviously 7. Let's try to mix it up.
Yes. And that's why I like seeing like, oh, they're not just a pair of 7s, like they're a 7 and a 6. But I think you do have that, like that ambition. I don't know that they could have started like they were in a recession and they started a booming business like from nothing. Obviously, they did have Harry, like, he gives them his Triwizard winnings and stuff, but I think that the way that they're able to leverage that, like, is really, really indicative, like you said, of the strengths and the beauties of a type 3. And I think, again, of their intelligence. Like, 3s get things done, and they are such talented wizards, even though they don't put that effort towards, like, traditional classroom academics in the same way.
I love it. Yeah, I think so, too.
Ugh. I love it.
Oh,
I love them.
I love it too. Well, we have our final character that I'm very excited to introduce. The Mama of Mama. Like, honestly, the only mother figure who, like, lasts the whole series. Like, everyone else seems to, like, go through something really terrible. We have Molly Weasley.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I'm sorry. I literally just saw this on, like, Harry Potter Reddit the other day. Might have been this morning, honestly. And it was Lily saying to Molly, like, don't worry, Molly, I'll watch over Fred since you've been watching over Harry for all of this.
I just got chills.
Oh.
Do you think it's interesting that heaven's like real in the wizarding world for some reason?
Mm-hmm. To me, I think afterlife, definitely, because then there's also the conversation about ghosts and like deciding to stay versus deciding to move on.
Oh, good point. Good point. Anyway, So Molly
Molly,
Weasley,
yes, sorry.
is the mother of the 6 Weasley children, which is just like so 7. I counted the twins as 1 again. Whoops, sorry everyone.
We just worked so hard to separate them.
Sorry, I know we worked so hard to separate them, and then I was just like, okay.
Sorry, friend George.
Sorry, friend George. Well, and like no, Charlie we see a little bit. No, Charlie's the one we don't see at all,
No,
right?
Charlie's the one we don't see.
Yeah, so like, come on. What if he was, there might be a conspiracy theory there. Like maybe he's doing
I was just going to say, what if he was like the big bad? Like, what if he just came back and was...
That would be interesting. Anyway, so if Fred and George wrote it, that's what.
Yeah, right. They would write
dragons.
Percy as the big bad. We know it.
Yes. Well, and Molly is so funny because I think we see her at her wit's end, like 90% of the time, because she has so many children, and like almost every time we see her, they're all home still. Like,
yes.
You know, we see her for a little bit with Ginny at home for only a year, right? And then she's back. She's at Hogwarts with the gang, and then it's like summer or Christmas or whatever is going on, and they're also very defined by their money in the series. Like they don't have a lot of money. They're going through a lot, and so Molly comes off as very like harsh, I think. Arthur kind of gets to be the dad who has fun and like, let's go to the wizarding, the Quidditch tournament. Thank you. And she happens to be like yelling, and then she like only loves Harry in a lot of the things. Like we see her like being super doting and kind to him. And
that feels very much like a very real life situation where like when you go over to a friend's house and like the whole family is like yelling and arguing, and then they like love you, and they're like,
okay,
exactly like when they show up with the flying car, and she's like, no note, bed's empty, car gone, and then she's like, Harry dear, lovely to see you. Like that feels like very.
I know, I was gonna say that shows about your character more than anyone else's. That like the parents are like, "Love you, Lucas." No, I do understand what you're saying. I was gonna say I feel like sometimes you're like, oh, when you have a friend over, your parents a new person. I'm like, yeah, that happens.
True. Yes.
But anyway, and we see Molly, and she is fiercely defensive over her children and such a mama bear. And I remember when I was reading the books, the Order of the Phoenix was so cool to read again because I was like, I felt like I got to see Molly in a new light, and just like, I loved all of the books because I had these like perceptions of these characters from the movies, and I watched them religiously, and then there's so much more depth, and I love that about Molly. You're nodding so much, Lucas. I feel like you have a lot to say. Like she's a great character.
Oh my gosh, no, I'm literally just agreeing. Like
yes, okay, good. Yeah,
that's so funny. Yeah, sometimes I nod when I'm like, yes, I need to say something, but I'm just like, oh, yes, I love Molly.
Yes,
I'm just nodding.
I do too, and I like think we would have been tight friends if we went to Hogwarts at the same time because of her number a little bit, but we'll talk about it in a second. Lucas, what do you think Molly Weasley's number is?
So I'm interested what you think her number is with that little tease. Really? I was between a couple numbers for her.
Okay.
Like just kind of that whole core type wing thing. And maybe this is just like the easy answer. And I think maybe this is because we experience the series through Harry's point of view. But like you mentioned, Molly is really the one stable maternal figure in his life. I would argue that Hagrid is also more of a maternal figure than a paternal, just in terms of like the space that he fills. But I love like the image of motherhood that Molly shows, especially as a mother to this family that then is stretched to its limits and yet will never say no to bringing Harry in as well. That being said, maybe experiencing it through Harry's point of view is coloring my read on her, because I thought she was a 2. I thought she was a helper. She is always, I think she's the one holding the Burrow together in the way that like only maybe a 2 can, where like she is helping for and providing for every single one of these 7 children, like keeping track of them all with her magic clock that is enchanted to like watch where every member of her family is at any time. She is simultaneously like casting a spell to like knit a new sweater for her kids. She hand knits sweaters for like, if her love language is not gifts, I mean, but it's also like acts of service and food. Like she is such a like loving person. that I see a lot of those like acts of service of a type 2 maybe. I did then also think about maybe the type 1, because like you said, like she's often very like strict. She's very like trying to keep everyone in order, especially to keep the twins in order. But then I love what you're saying about like later series in Order of the Phoenix, when she is arguing with Sirius about like what is the best way to like keep these kids safe. She is not afraid to like look Harry's godfather in his eyes and say like, no, you're wrong. Like, I know what's best and we are going to keep these kids safe. Like Harry is too young. He is a child. I'm going to keep him from like having to fight this war before he has to. And so that's interesting.
Yeah.
And that brought me to the 1. So I was between the 1 and the 2. So I'm interested what you think she is.
I like thought she was an 8, and I thought we were going to be like, oh, obviously she's an 8.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know what? The 8 did cross my mind. So
yeah. So like, just like, again, like
yes.
The 8s are so strong and powerful. Their fear is to be like being harmed or being controlled. And I think like that's why she controls what's going on around her and knows where her people are. Like she does sometimes like sit in that anger and like frustration. I think like when you have 7 kids, like that's kind of like, it's not a choice. Like you just are like, you know, how do you end? But like, so a lot of times, like I think of the Howler, I'm like, oh, that's such an 8 move. And how she like, explicit warning coming, you know, where she's like, not my daughter, you bitch, like to Bellatrix.
I screamed
and, like,
out loud when I read that for the first time.
I'm like, I think that she's holding that in like throughout the series. Like I think that she loves and adores, like she obviously loves and adores her family, and she has the 8-ness of like wanting to protect them over everything. And when she sees the Boggart, she sees her children dead. Like that is
yes,
and like that is very. And I think Choose obviously love their families. They go to, and 8s go to 2 in growth. And so I think like that's where we see a lot of that loving and kindness and where that is. But I think like her natural state, if like we knew her when she was at Hogwarts or like young independent woman, she has that fire in her. She's like, and she's also like the driver of the family. Like, cause like Arthur's kind of like, you know, playing with his toys. Like he's more passive. Like, and she's like, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. And like, again, like when she stands up to Sirius, who like, she thinks is like a convicted murderer. She's very confused about what's going on. And like, she doesn't care. She's going to go up to him. And like, she doesn't care if Bellatrix is like Voldemort's right-hand woman. She's like up there and going. And I think she's a challenger and she can see the way the world should be without Voldemort. And I think she has a little bit of fear. I think she has that wing. I think she has a wing 9. And like the wing 8, wing 9 is called in the Enneagram Institute and in the word back to the bear. And I'm like, oh, that's so Molly Weasley and like protective and loyal. And just like, I just think of her as like very fierce. And I think like, because of what you said, because we're seeing her from Harry's point of view, we do see that like the 2, because she's caring and loving. But I also think like she is caring and loving as a person. But she's like, the thing about her, she loves fiercely. And like, that's kind of how she thinks the world should be. And so when she's like, no, you know, like kind of superstitious and stuff, that's kind of her 9. Like, but it's also, that comes from fear, wanting to keep the peace. So I was like, I thought you were going to say that too. I was like, very sure she was an 8. So I'm interested that I see the 2 for sure. But I also just think that that's like a mom syndrome, you know?
Well, something similar to that I was thinking about, because I love what you have to say about all of it, is with, I think one way that I often recognize a type 8 is I think about the way that they like make new relationships. Like 8s usually take some time to like warm up, open up. Like they're usually kind of guarded before you really get to know them. And at first I was like, oh, Molly is just like so willing and able to like open her arms for Harry. But then I think about the context of that relationship. She like, he's an 11-year-old kid. Like it's not the same as like meeting a new coworker. Like she sees this really vulnerable child and she sees her ability to protect him as best as she can. And like, I think she automatically takes that opportunity. I love the idea of the type 8. I had originally thought that she was a 2 who went to the 8 in stress. And so like in a really high stress, like literal battle at the end of a war, she like accesses that fire and the ferocity to like take down Bellatrix. But I think and that is hard to say because a lot of the series takes place in a war, like in a really high stress situation, similar to like the Hunger Games, where we were like, well, they're all in really like terrible circumstances right now. But I really love reframing, because I was also thinking about her Bogart and the way that, like, you talked about her worst fear. We literally see her worst fear externalized in the Bogart that is showing her one by one the bodies of her dead family. And she lost her, this is from the books. I'm sure they never added this in the movies, but she loses her brothers in the first Wizarding World War. And she names Fred and George for them because they were Fabian and Gideon. And like, she, I think, carries a lot of that like pain with
lose
her.
Him twice.
Oh, yes. And I think that she carries that pain with her, but she also, like you said, is not going to let anybody hurt another one of her people ever again. Like she says, she looks to Bellatrix, and at that point in the war, like, she's already lost Fred, and she says, like, not my daughter. I'm getting very emotional.
I know, I'm getting emotional too.
I have chills. All of which is to say, I love that image of the 8. I love the 8-wing 9 as the bear as well, like as that mama bear, as that person who, and you're totally right. And I think Arthur's really interesting about the way that she kind of has to step in and like be that, like, that driving force and like the person who makes sure that everyone inside of this home, like, you walk into the Burrow, I'm going to make sure you're safe. I'm going to make sure you're fed. I'm going to take care of you. Like, I'm going to like envelop you in that like comfort. But I also see, like you said, that drive and that fire of the type 8. Ooh.
Yeah, I think so. Are we okay with 8-wing 9?
I am more than okay with it. Thank you for that. Ooh.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Well, we have a couple extra minutes. We've brought up Arthur a few times, her husband, Arthur Weasley. Do you want to talk about him real quick?
I would love to, especially because I did take some notes. Just, I think, thinking about like this family and some of the context, like, he does pop up a little bit. Do you have any like strong thoughts about Arthur?
I do not. So why don't you like share how you feel, and I'll see if I agree or disagree. I have like, I did not think about it while I was taking notes, so right. This will be a gut reaction.
So I think what I love about Arthur Weasley is his curiosity. He loves Muggles. He loves everything to do with Muggles. He's very open-minded in that way. Like, the Weasleys as a family are really a safe haven for people that the pure blood community don't consider like worthy, whether that be like Lupin as a werewolf or Hermione as a Muggle-born. They are considered, because the Weasleys were a pure blood line, they're considered what like the Malfoys call blood traitors, because even though they're pure blood wizards, they associate with Muggles. But like, Arthur just has this like open heart and mind to learn all about the Muggle world. He asks Harry in the Chamber of Secrets when Harry's joining them for breakfast, like, so tell me, what is the function of a rubber ducky? Like, that's what he wants to know. Like, he wants to play around with an old Muggle car and like enchant it to fly. All of that like curiosity. And I think, like you said, like, sometimes he's off in his own little world while Molly is putting out all the fires around the house. Like, I think he gets lost in his own little world in the way that a type 5 does. I think he's a 5, probably a wing 6, because I think there's a lot of 6 energy in that home. Like, it's just such a loving, loyal, like, strong family. That I think he's probably a 5 wing 6, but I really see the type 5 more than anything.
I do too. I it's weird. He gives me 9 energy. Like, I do think he is very like
so easygoing.
And I like, even the fact that like Molly sends the Howler, even though it's like his job that's at stake.
Yes,
is
and
very
his car
like 9.
That was lost.
Yeah.
And
and he's just like, and you never hear about it again. Like, he never brings it up. So like, I'm like, that's a little 9 energy to me. But I also think that like sometimes that's just like the 5, like, living in my own world, like, whatever, you know. And I do think like, because he's so fascinated and so curious, he probably is. I think like there's contextual evidence for him being a 5. I just like also want to just say like, he gives me a little bit of 9 energy.
I do love that. I do see that 9 energy. I think, there's a part of me that just like loves the way, I think he does have such a non-judgmental affect. And I think that is like very similar to a type 9. Like, 9s like are very like kind of objective. They're not very judgmental, but I think it's just because he just like wants to learn everything. Like, he's just curious. And he doesn't have, in the way that his sons like Fred do, he doesn't have, or Percy, I think he doesn't have a ton of ambition, because I think he's just content to like live in his little shed and like learn everything that he can about these Muggle artifacts without, what, like he's happy with his family and he's happy where he is. And like,
I know.
I think that contentment is also very 9. So I like that shout out to the type 9 too.
I do too. Well, also, this was so fun to do the Weasleys that like we love, we hold most dear. I know there's a lot more of them, and we'll touch on 2 of them in the future, but this is really fun.
So much fun. I just want to like, I feel like I'm wrapped in a big like homemade Afghan and just like sitting in front of the fire at the Burrow right now. Like,
I know. I'd love a summer. I'd like to try a summer at the Burrow. I just feel like I would be a really good Weasley in-law.
Well, I'll become a Weasley, and then I'll become the 7th son. You'll marry George. We'll all be a big happy family.
Okay. I know.
It's a deal.
I know. I just like, maybe we can unalive Fred and maybe we can make that happen.
You mean undead Fred?
Yes, I did mean that. Undead Fred. Oh my gosh. Well, Lucas, love you. Weasley kisses to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Typecasting. Leave a review and tell your friends about the show. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Typecasting Pod for more Enneagram and pop culture fun.